Imagine waking up, turning on the TV, and every news anchor sounds like the world is ending. That century-old bakery down your street is suddenly boarded up. Your parents' company just announced they are firing half their staff. And in just a few days, the global stock market evaporated tens of trillions of dollars. It was like taking the entire wealth of several mid-sized countries and just setting it on fire. This isn't a sci-fi movie. This actually happened 18 years ago, back in 2008. The history books call it the global subprime mortgage crisis. If you lived through that time or heard your parents talk about it, type "witnessed history" in the comments right now. Whenever economists talk about this crash, they throw around headache-inducing words like MBS, CDO, CDS, high leverage, and liquidity dry-ups. But if we strip away all that fancy financial armor, you'll find that this earthquake, which almost destroyed the global economy, came down to one ancient, simple human flaw: greed, and a nationwide gamble that housing prices will never go down. Today, we are going to use the simplest way possible to take you back 18 years. Let's see how the smartest guys on Wall Street, wearing custom suits and holding Ivy League degrees, somehow managed to lose the world's money. To understand the 2008 disaster, we have to rewind the clock back to the year 2000. Back then, the US economy took two massive hits. First, the dot-com bubble burst, wiping out countless tech companies, followed by the tragic events of 9/11 in 2001. The whole American society fell into a panic. Nobody wanted to spend money, and a massive recession was knocking at the door. Enter Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve at the time. To encourage people to go out and spend or invest, he used his ultimate weapon: crazy interest rate cuts. Between 2001 and 2003, the Fed dropped the federal funds rate from 6.5% all the way down to 1%. What does 1% mean? It means borrowing money from the bank was practically free. When money is this cheap and leaving it in the bank earns you zero interest, what do people do? They buy something they can see, touch, and believe will go up in value forever: houses. Driven by the American dream, a massive home buying frenzy swept the nation. Housing prices started rocketing upwards. Normally, getting a mortgage from a bank is super strict. They check your income, your tax returns, and demand a hefty down payment. Loans given to these safe, reliable people with stable incomes are called prime loans. But here's the catch: the number of prime customers is limited, and the rich and middle class quickly got their loans. The local banks looked at the soaring house prices, then looked at the massive crowds at their doors wanting to borrow money, and they saw red. They thought, if house prices keep going up, who cares if the borrower is dead broke? If they can't pay, we just take the house back, sell it, and still make a profit. And just like that, Pandora's box was opened. Banks started targeting people with terrible credit, ultra-low incomes, or even no jobs at all. These high-risk loans got a deadly new name: subprime mortgages. How crazy did it get? There was a famous type of loan in the US market called the Ninja loan. Ninja stood for no income, no job, and no assets. As long as you were a breathing human being, you didn't even have to sign your name. Heck, your pet dog could probably put a paw print on a contract, and a mortgage broker would hand you $500,000 to buy a mansion. Even crazier, some of these loans required zero interest payments for the first 2 years. Think about it. If you were walking down the street and someone shoved $500,000 in your hands to buy a house and told you that you didn't have to pay a dime for the first 2 years, would you be tempted? Press 1 in the chat for yes, or 2 if you think it's absolutely a trap. The data doesn't lie. In 2001, the US handed out about $160 billion in subprime loans. By 2006, that number crazily exploded to $600 billion. Millions of Americans were living in luxury homes they couldn't actually afford. Everyone thought they were millionaires. Now, you might be thinking, were these local commercial banks out of their minds? Loaning out money that even a fool knows they'd never get back. Weren't they afraid of going bankrupt? This is where the grand illusion gets truly brilliant and totally evil. The local banks never planned to take the risk themselves. They had already sold the risk to Wall Street. In the old days, banking was traditional. You got a 30-year mortgage, and the bank had to sit around for 30 years, collecting tiny bits of interest, slowly getting their principal back. If you lost your job or went bankrupt during those 30 years, the bank had to eat the loss. But that was too slow and way too risky. So, Wall Street's financial wizards invented a word that changed financial history: securitization. Let me give you a simple analogy. You are an apple farmer, representing the local bank. You have a huge basket of apples, representing the I.O. Gus from regular people's mortgages. You have to wait for the apples to sell slowly to make your money back. Suddenly, a Wall Street tycoon walks up and says, "Hey buddy, sell me the ownership of this entire basket. I'll give you a massive pile of cash right now." From now on, the money people pay for these apples every month goes straight into my pocket. The farmer is thrilled. He gets his cash instantly. And the most important part? Even if those apples rot later because people stop paying their loans, it has absolutely nothing to do with him anymore. With their pockets full of fresh cash, the local banks turned right around and went back to the streets, handing out even more ninja loans. This created a perfect endless loop, professionally known as the originate-to-distribute model. Because they didn't have to worry about borrowers defaulting, local banks completely lost the motivation to check backgrounds. Their only goal was to print as many loans as possible, as fast as possible, and sell them to Wall Street for a fat commission. Wall Street took these thousands of mortgage IOUs, bundled them together into a giant financial product, and called it an MBS, mortgage-backed security. Then Wall Street sliced this MBS into 10,000 pieces and sold them to investors all over the world. Why did investors buy them? Because as long as American homeowners kept paying their monthly mortgages, the investors got a juicy cut of the interest. And under the absolute faith that house prices always go up, it looked like a guaranteed win. But Wall Street soon ran into a new problem. They found out that the MBS made from prime loans, the good apples, sold incredibly well. The whole world was fighting over them. But the MBS made from the subprime loans, the bad apples from people with no jobs or income, nobody dared to buy. After all, investors aren't stupid. Who wants to lend money to someone who can't even afford to eat? The Wall Street elites didn't panic. They invented the greatest and most terrifying magic in financial history: the CDO, or collateralized debt obligation. Here is how it worked. Wall Street took thousands of these unwanted subprime loans, stuffed them into a giant financial blender, and pureed them into a blurry apple mush. Then they poured this mush into a giant champagne tower. This tower had 3 levels. The top level, the senior tranche. This is the safest. Even if 20% of the borrowers at the bottom default, as long as someone is still paying, the incoming money must fill this top level first. The middle level, the mezzanine tranche. Medium risk, medium reward. If more people default, this level starts losing money. The bottom level, the equity tranche, or toxic waste. Extremely high risk. If anyone stops paying, this level takes the hit first. But in return, if everyone pays, its yield is the highest. Wall Street took this highly complex champagne tower system to a very important player in the financial world: the rating agencies, like the famous Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch. Rating agencies act like food safety inspectors. Whether investors buy a financial product entirely depends on the label they give it. Normally, no matter how you shuffle it, apple mush made entirely from rotten subprime apples is still garbage and should be rated as junk. But the money involved was just too big. Wall Street told the rating agencies, "If you give me a safe stamp, I'll pay you millions of dollars in evaluation fees. If you don't, I'll just walk across the street to your competitor and let them make the money." Tempted by massive profits, the rating agencies completely abandoned their professional ethics. They closed their eyes and stamped the top glasses of these CDOs with their highest safety seal: AAA. Let's pause for a second. Let me test you. Do you know what AAA rating means? In the financial world, AAA means it's as safe as U.S. Treasury bonds, meaning it's almost absolutely impossible to default. At the time, only a very few top-tier companies in the whole country, like Microsoft and Johnson & Johnson, could get a AAA rating. It was like a soccer match where the referee secretly took bribes to help a team cheat. When these AAA-rated financial products, packaged from the rotten IOS of unemployed people, went out into the world, global investors went absolutely crazy for them. German pension funds, Japanese commercial banks, Icelandic government agencies, and even some Chinese financial institutions, they all pulled out real cash to frantically buy up this toxic apple mush made by Wall Street. Because everyone believed the authority of the rating agencies, and more importantly, they believed that U.S. housing prices would never fall. According to later statistics, of the AAA-rated subprime CDOs issued in 2006, over 90% were later downgraded to junk. But at the time, it was a wild party that nobody wanted to wake up from. If it were just buying and selling bad apples, this would have only been a localized crisis. But the greed of financiers has no bottom line. They strapped two super accelerators onto this already highly dangerous bomb: leverage and CDS. First, let's talk about leverage. Suppose you only have $10,000 and you buy $10,000 worth of stocks. If it goes up 10%, you make $1,000. If it drops 10%, you lose $1,000. That's zero leverage. But Wall Street felt that was too slow. They only had $10,000 in capital, but through complex collateral, they borrowed $300,000 from other banks, making it $310,000 to buy CDOs and earn massive interest. This is called 30 times leverage. In 2007, top Wall Street investment banks like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns had leverage ratios reaching an astonishing 30 to 40 times. What does that mean? Anyone in the comments who knows a little math can figure it out. It means that if the price of the assets they bought dropped by just a little over 3%, which is 1 divided by 30, their own capital would instantly vanish into thin air, and they would be bankrupt. They were walking a tightrope over an abyss, suspended by a single strand of hair, and tap dancing while doing it. Now let's talk about CDS, or credit default swaps. This was an even crazier invention. Simply put, it's financial insurance. Investors bought those AAA-rated CDOs, but they still felt a little nervous. What if U.S. housing prices actually do fall and people collectively stop paying? Enter the American International Group, or AIG, the largest insurance giant in the universe at the time. The boss of AIG patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, you pay me a little premium every year, and if your CDO loses money, no matter how much, AIG will pay you back in full." Why did AIG dare to make such a guarantee? Because their top actuaries ran highly complex mathematical models and concluded the U.S. real estate market has regional differences. If the East Coast drops, the West Coast might still be rising. It is absolutely impossible for housing prices across the entire U.S. to drop at the same time. So they thought these premiums were basically free money falling from the sky. Why not take it? But here is the truly terrifying part. With CDS insurance, you were allowed to buy it naked. What does that mean? In the real world, the law says you cannot buy fire insurance on your neighbor's house. Why? Because if you did, you'd get rich if your neighbor's house burned down, which gives you a huge incentive to commit arson. But on Wall Street in 2008, there was no regulation. You could buy CDS insurance on a CDO you didn't even own. This was the equivalent of hundreds of strangers simultaneously betting that their neighbor's house would catch fire. By the end of 2007, the global CDS market had bloated to a horrifying $60 trillion. To put that in perspective, if you added up the GDP of every country in the world at that time, it was roughly that same number. A super nuke built on lies, greed, rotten IOS, and dozens of times leverage, larger than the entire global economy, had just ticked down to its final second. There is no such thing as a bubble that never bursts. If you keep blowing air into a balloon, there is always a second when it pops. And the one who personally popped this bubble was the very institution that blew it up, the Federal Reserve. Starting in 2004, because there was too much money in the market causing severe inflation, prices were soaring. To crush inflation, the Fed started continuously raising interest rates. By 2006, the federal funds rate was aggressively hiked from 1% all the way to 5.25%. Suddenly, the poor people at the bottom who took out those ninja loans were stunned, because when they borrowed the money, most of them signed an adjustable rate mortgage, or ARM. This type of loan was incredibly sneaky. The interest was super low for the first 2 years, and you didn't even have to pay principal. But once the 2-year honeymoon was over, the interest rate would spike drastically along with the Fed's rate hikes. By the end of 2006, millions of lower-class Americans suddenly found that their monthly mortgage payments had instantly doubled or even tripled. They didn't have jobs or savings to begin with, and now they couldn't afford a single dime. What do you do when you can't pay on time? It's simple. You default, you throw the keys on the table, abandon the house, and hand it back to the bank. When millions of people started defaulting, the market was suddenly flooded with foreclosed houses that banks were desperately trying to auction off. Supply massively outweighed demand, and U.S. housing prices finally hit a historic turning point. They started free-falling. When housing prices dropped, the first domino fell. Massive defaults on bottom-level mortgages meant that those chopped up and packaged MBS and CDOs, the rotten apple mush, could no longer collect their monthly interest. That champagne tower dried up from the bottom and spread all the way up. Even the top tier, stamped with the AAA seal, turned into completely worthless paper. Wall Street panicked. In March 2008, Bear Stearns, the fifth largest investment bank on Wall Street with an 85-year history, suddenly found its cash flow severed because it was holding too many toxic assets it couldn't sell. On the brink of bankruptcy, it was humiliatingly bought by J.P. Morgan Chase for a scrap paper price of $2 a share. Soon after, the two largest mortgage giants in the U.S., Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who held or guaranteed over half of all U.S. mortgages, were pushed to the brink. The U.S. government had no choice but to pull out hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars to urgently take them over. But that was just the appetizer. The real super tsunami hit on September 15, 2008. This day was destined to be permanently recorded in human financial history. Lehman Brothers, the fourth largest investment bank on Wall Street, with a 158-year history, having survived the U.S. Civil War, 2 World Wars, and the Great Depression of 1929, met its doomsday. Lehman Brothers played the wildest game in this subprime party. Not only did they hold a massive amount of toxic subprime assets, but they also used a lethal leverage ratio of over 30 times. As asset prices collapsed, Lehman Brothers, burdened with a staggering $619 billion in debt, was pushed into a corner. All weekend long, Lehman executives desperately begged the U.S. government and major banks for a bailout. But Hank Paulson, the U.S. Treasury Secretary at the time, made a brutally cold decision: no bailout. The government didn't want taxpayers paying for Wall Street's greed. They wanted to make an example out of Lehman, telling Wall Street, "You made this mess, you clean it up." And so, in the early hours of September 15th, Lehman Brothers officially declared bankruptcy. In that instant, the global financial system went into cardiac arrest. Why would one bank collapsing cause such a massive disaster? Because the modern financial system runs entirely on one word: trust. If a century-old, massive giant like Lehman Brothers, a company thought to be too big to fail, could turn to dust in an instant, who could you trust? You had no idea how many toxic assets the bank across the street was hiding in its vaults. As a result, banks completely stopped lending money to each other, and liquidity in the financial markets instantly dried up. It was like the blood in a human body suddenly stopping its flow. Every organ began to die. If you think Wall Street going bankrupt is just a game for rich people and has nothing to do with everyday folks, you are dead wrong. The financial tsunami rapidly mutated into a catastrophic blow to the global real economy. In the US, because banks stopped lending, countless small and medium-sized businesses couldn't get the cash they needed to operate. They couldn't pay salaries, so they had to initiate massive layoffs. The US unemployment rate spiked to 10%, and millions of families lost their only source of income. The fall of the insurance giant, AIG, which sold countless CDS insurance policies, was faced with an avalanche of claims. They realized their vaults were empty and faced immediate collapse. In the end, the US government was forced to spend $180 billion to bail them out. Because AIG was tied to the pensions of millions of people globally and the insurance of multinational corporations. If it fell, the world economy would literally stop spinning. National bankruptcies. In Europe, Iceland, a country of just over 300,000 people, saw its three major banks crazily borrow money to invest in US subprime loans, leading to bank liabilities 10 times the nation's GDP. When the bubble burst, the entire country of Iceland basically declared bankruptcy. Their currency plummeted, inflation skyrocketed, national wealth was cut in half instantly, and even the president had to go on TVs to urge people to go fishing in the ocean just to survive. The Asian shockwave. Because Americans and Europeans lost their jobs and stopped spending, factories all the way in Asia took the hit. Countless export manufacturing factories in coastal China received zero orders overnight. Thousands of small businesses shut down, and over 20 million migrant workers were forced to return to their villages. Japan's exports also suffered a devastating drop. According to estimates by the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, the global financial sector lost trillions of dollars in this crisis, and the global stock market evaporated roughly $16 trillion in value. Billions of ordinary people all over the world, without even realizing it, had a massive chunk of their wealth violently stolen by this Wall Street gamble. Take a guess in the comments or try to remember how many people worldwide lost their jobs during that crash. The number will absolutely blow your mind, seeing that the entire world was about to repeat the Great Depression of 1929, with everyone lining up for food rations. Global governments had no choice but to take unprecedented, extreme actions. The US government rolled out the $700 billion TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Using American taxpayers' money, they forcefully bought up those unsellable, toxic garbage assets from the banks, giving the dying banks an emergency blood transfusion. Soon after, the Federal Reserve launched the famous quantitative easing, or QE. It sounds highly technical, but simply put, the Fed turned on a super money printer, created trillions of dollars out of thin air, pumped it into the market, and forcefully pushed interest rates down to near zero. It was like the government flying a helicopter over the city and dumping cash out of the sky. Other central banks around the world quickly followed suit, printing money at full speed to save the markets, relying on this helicopter money and financial super antibiotics. The life of the global financial system was barely saved, and the economy slowly bottomed out and rebounded in the following years. However, the aftermath of this crisis left behind an incredibly absurd, deeply heartbreaking reality. Think about it carefully. In this epic disaster, who made the mistakes? It was the local banks who closed their eyes and handed out ninja loans. It was the suited elites on Wall Street who gambled with 30 times leverage to earn massive commissions. It was the rating agencies who took dirty money to blindly stamp AAA approvals. But who paid the heavy price? It was the millions of lower-class Americans whose homes were foreclosed, forcing them onto the streets. It was the ordinary assembly line workers around the world who lost their jobs because the orders stopped coming. And it was all of humanity. Because the money the governments printed to save the markets eventually flooded the system and caused inflation, which quietly diluted the purchasing power of every hard-earned dollar in every ordinary person's pocket. What's even more infuriating is that the Wall Street executives who pushed the world into the abyss hardly faced any jail time. After their companies received massive bailout funds from the government, from the taxpayers, they turned right around and still paid themselves tens of millions of dollars in year-end bonuses. This is the biggest, most shameless unspoken rule in the financial world. Privatize profits, socialize losses. When the money is rolling in, it goes into their own pockets. When the losses hit, they drag the whole society down to foot the bill. This extreme injustice directly fueled the Occupy Wall Street movement that swept across the US and Europe, deeply tearing open the wealth gap in society. It even indirectly birthed another miracle in modern financial history. In January 2009, someone under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a piece of code and created Bitcoin. In the Genesis block of Bitcoin, he engraved a message. The Times, March 3, 2009 Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It was a silent mockery of the traditional banking system and the ultimate rebellion by a group of people who refused to ever trust a centralized fiat currency system again. 18 years have passed, and the 2008 financial tsunami has become just another page in the history books. Today, various new financial tools and virtual assets are still being wildly speculated on in the market. History always seems to repeat itself, just wearing a different mask. As ordinary people, spending 20 minutes to understand this crisis isn't to get an economics degree. It's to protect the money you work so hard to earn in the years to come. As we end this video, I want to leave you with 3 iron rules of wealth that apply to any era. First, never believe the myth that it only goes up, whether it's real estate, stocks, or some new crypto asset. When everyone is frantically buying in, when the lady selling vegetables on the street is telling you something is guaranteed to make money and you should borrow to buy it, that is usually the eve of a crash. Remember, trees don't grow to the sky. Second, if you don't understand it, absolutely do not touch it. 18 years ago, regular people didn't understand CDOs and CDSs. Today, many people might not understand fancy-sounding quantitative wealth management or high-yield arbitrage. As long as you don't understand exactly how it generates a profit at its core, it is highly likely trying to profit off your principal. Don't let professional jargon intimidate you. Great truths are always simple. If you can't read it, don't buy it. Third, maintain extreme respect for debt and leverage. Borrowing money can definitely help you buy the things you want earlier, but debt is also a monster that can eat you alive. In a good economy, leverage gives you wings. But when the economic tide goes out, even a 10% drop is enough to instantly wipe out a highly leveraged person. Plan your personal finances well and always leave yourself a survival fund to make it through the winter. All right, that wraps up our deep dive into the 2008 financial crisis. If you feel like this video finally made all those complicated professional terms clear and gave you that aha moment, please smash the like button and forward it to your friends and family. This is Civilization Unmasked, where we are dedicated to using the most accessible language to help you see through this complex world. What seemingly impenetrable major event do you want us to break down next using this method? The 1929 Great Depression or the current global currency wars? Let me know loud and clear in the comments. See you next time. Bye.